So, Ed, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm good. I'm good. Yourself?
Good, good. Thank you. I'm good. So, in your connection to the connecting Oshawa to the story, what was your life like in Oshawa growing up? Was the GM
Uh,
plant still going?
the GM plant was still going. I think there was still like constant sort of layoffs happening, but I think like about half the people who lived on my street probably worked at the GM plant. So it was there. It was really strong. And my parents did not work there. My parents both worked in Toronto, so it was like they would commute in and out every day. It's mostly, my parents split when I was pretty young. So it's mostly my mom who, lived with, who she commuted to and from Toronto, which, this is pre GO train days. So it was, about an hour and a
Oh,
half
whoa.
drive each way on the 401, because that traffic is brutal. Um, but yeah, I don't know. Life was weird in Oshawa. I remember it being a pretty rough place. The area I lived in, I wouldn't say it was a super rough neighborhood, but definitely lots of.
Where were you from?
I lived right. Where I lived by Laval Park. So right by, I think there's a Lowe's just kind of across on Stevenson there, and sort of like the mall is the other way. Like I could walk to the mall in about
Yeah.
10 minutes, and
So I
there's a
think Lowe's
Lowe's
is
and a big.
gone now. Lowe's is
Even then,
gone. They were
it
taken
was
over by Verona.
there we go. Yeah, it was a field when I lived there. It wasn't even a Lowe's. The Lowe's came after. But I lived there, that area. It was, I liked it. I loved Oshawa growing up. It was weird when we left, but I think the strangest thing when I left was that, like, I went and moved to another city where it turned out you didn't have to like get into a fight with someone every week, which was kind of my experience in Oshawa.
Right on. So, what's the importance to you of cultural representation in comics? How different would the story have been if you'd set it in another city altogether?
Well, I think for part of the reason I chose Oshawa was just my own sort of connection to the city, but I think there's Oshawa has a lot going that sort of is sort of directly sort of correlated or represented by the story, if not um, overtly, but it's there. Like Oshawa has an incredible homeless and drug crisis going on right now. So there's a lot of people who live there kind of unseen. Um, we talked about the GM plant already. That was like the source of most of the employment in Oshawa, and that sort of has gradually disappeared over the years, and left Oshawa a bit of a husk. Oshawa, like, it's had a really rough go of it over the last few years, so the last few decades probably. So
Mhm.
there was a lot of that sort of thematic connection for the story I was doing, about being forgotten, about disappearing, about these things that you love being sort of lost and taken away. And for me, just in terms of like representing Canada, representing the cities, I grew up reading Marvel, I grew up reading DC, etc., and you know I it was everywhere, just felt so far and fictional. It wasn't until I was like in my teenagers, I think, that I read a book that was set in Sudbury, where my dad had moved up to Sudbury later, and we would spend summers there. And he bought me a book called The Cartoonist by Sean Costello, which was like a horror book about a comic book artist. And it was set in Sudbury. And so the streets mentioned were streets I knew. And for me, it forged a sort of like deeper connection with the material. It was like seeing sort of this like local representation, um, and familiar places inside a world of fiction that I felt it pulled me in so much deeper into the story, and that's something I always try and do with my writing. I tend to send my writing a lot in places I live or have lived, for that same sort of reason. I want to mix it up. Not everything needs to be set in New York or LA. I feel like, there's stories in Oshawa, there's stories in Vancouver where I used to live, and in Halifax where I live now. And I love the idea of diving into that and sort of finding those types of stories that are both universal, but at the same time could only happen in Halifax, Oshawa, Vancouver, what have you.
Well, I can tell you should see the smile on people's faces, because I'll take Displaced off the shelf. It's standing right next to Spider-Man or Batman or something, and I flip open the first page. I'm like, oh, sure. I flip open the second page. We've got Ajax, and we're in Port Perry and Whitby, and it's like, oh, cool. I didn't write this story, but it feels like it's our story. It's a story about us. We could be running around in the background somewhere. How did you and Luca end up picking the references and the locations? We've got like Shoppers Drug or Happy's Drugstore,
right.
the Independent, the church and stuff. Were they pulled straight off of Street View? Did you guys do a little tour of Durham before writing it?
So he lives in Italy. So unfortunately, he's never been to or seen Oshawa. I left, years ago, but I tend to come back every couple of years, and every time I come back, I kind of go around and sort of, document the places I grew up. Like I take a lot of photographs every time I go back. So I had a ton of photos of, different areas of Oshawa. I was actually nearly got into a lot of trouble taking those photographs because I went to my old school. I went to St. Thomas Aquinas Elementary School, and I was out there taking photographs and not realizing that I was taking photos of the elementary school while the school was in session. In my mind, it was summer already, but no, I have a lot of photos that I've taken over the years of Oshawa every time. Because I've been working on this story like concept wise since 2008, and so I've been trying to sort of figure it out. And so every time I would go back, I would take photos of different locations that I knew I was going to be using. Google Street View has become, of course, an invaluable resource for this sort of stuff, especially now that you can dial it back and forth and see several years back if you want to see the change of a location. But just having my own photos, having that Google Street View, having locations where I knew I wanted to set things, like the opening bit where Oshawa disappears was always set on that sort of stretch of road, because I was always obsessed with that little stretch of road as a kid, because when you drive into Oshawa, you drive past the Oshawa sign, but if you look at the other side of the road where you would be entering into Whitby, it's about like 50 meters down the Whitby sign. And as a kid, that used to mess me up because I didn't know what the in-between part was. Like, is that Oshawa? Is that Whitby? Is it nothing? So as a kid, it messed me up, and I always knew I wanted to set it there. There are other parts, like Gabby's house is the house I grew up in. So I just use old
cool.
My house. Trying to think. Yeah, Happy's is obviously it's just Shoppers Drug Mart. We just renamed it so we wouldn't get sued. And the diner is the Sunset Diner, I believe it is, that we just renamed it again. Yeah, but I wanted it to feel authentic. I wanted it to feel like it was Oshawa, like you were getting, or Oshawa's gone, but you're getting a tour of the sort of surrounding areas.
Where is that bar in Ajax? That's the number one question I get. So, is it still there? Is it another bar?
That is the only sort of made up location. Was right at the beginning. I needed a bar, and I didn't know Ajax. That area of because Ajax has changed so much since I left. Since I moved away, that that's literally in the book. The only made up location is that one Ajax bar. Everything else is based on an actual place. And it's my one regret. If I could go back, I would find an actual bar in Ajax and use actual.
Well, nudge, nudge. There's a place in Pickering Village, which is the Ajax Pickering border, and Ajax claimed Pickering Village at some point. There's a bar there, just for reference in the future.
All right, I'll so Ajax bar.
I know you said that you've been writing it since how has your initial vision and story evolved since your first draft, since you started the the creation process?
So it evolved over the years in terms of like the cast kept changing over the years who's in it. A very early, it's weirdly it's gone back to like sort of my initial thing. It's made these sort of changes, and then I've kind of dialed it back to what I was initially planning, because um, at some point we added there was like a bad guy. There was a guy who was going away and separating everyone out, so that they would be forgotten by the group and disappear, because he believed it was God's will or whatever. There was another version of it where we had this very long and convoluted explanation for what was happening and why it was happening, etc. And ultimately, like, we don't know if we're getting beyond 5 issues. So for me, the story is not necessarily about why or how this is happening. It's not about bad guys versus good guys. It's really about finding yourself in this situation, suffering, this sort of loss, and how you cope and how you move forward and how you survive in this highly unique and unusual scenario. And so it's about the survivors. It's not about the thing. It's not about the big mystery at the center of it, as much as it is about the reaction and how we cope.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said,
And the
early
take
versions,
on the survivors.
I was gonna say early versions, bad guy, big scientific mishap that makes it happen. Different versions of why it's happening. But yeah, it's the survivors' stories that I think are the most important here.
Yeah, the take on the survivors is super interesting because you have your typical post-apocalyptic wasteland kind of group of survivors, or world's been taken over by zombies group of survivors, but these guys are in a situation that, like, I can't think that I've seen anywhere else, where people are forgetting they exist. There's a kind of this reverse Spider-Man, or no, with great power comes great responsibility sort of thing. They have this power or this curse that they're being forgotten. So there's a group of the survivors that go this way and they start robbing places and shooting things up. And then there's a group that's just like, how do we make it to the next day, staying as a unit and keeping ourselves healthy, I guess.
Yeah, and then like, because they can't be remembered, they don't have the luxury of getting a job. They don't have the luxury of being able to open a bank account, get an apartment, any of that sort of stuff. So like, it's how do you survive in a world where you can't work, even they can't do day jobs, because if they're working for someone, that person turns their back on them for a moment, they're forgotten, and they're not getting paid.
Mm-hmm. So issue 5 is coming out. Just had another order last night for it. People are loving it.
Awesome.
You said that we might not see past issue 5, or do you have a plan for a later series if it's in the cards?
Yeah, it's kind of a wait and see sort of situation. Boom did greenlight a 5-issue mini. I definitely have plans for where I want to go next and what it looks like for the future of these characters. But I think it's a kind of wait and see how the trade does, how the sales continue, and fingers crossed. But I definitely don't want to promise something that's not going to happen. But I always hope that we'll be able to continue.
Yeah, well, we'll do our part to make that happen. That was something I did want to ask you about as well, is how, working across Marvel, DC, Boom, how do you find working across the various publishers? How's the process different between each one, the back and forth, behind the scenes?
Yeah, well, with like the big two, it's generally like, which is like Marvel and DC, they would come to, I'm going to sneeze just one moment here. I'll put you on mute, and it's gone. Okay. With Marvel and DC, they generally come to you with like sort of a mandate, like, we want to do this book. Here are the couple things that, have to happen in this book. There's guardrails for things that you can and cannot do, right? Because it's their characters. I can't write Spider-Man and kill Spider-Man, right? I can't, I don't know. There's a lot of stuff you can and can't do, or that you can't do. There's guardrails, which is always it is a challenge, and it's a fun to work within confines. Sometimes, you want uh, to have these limits, but at the end of the day, you have to put the toys back on the shelf for someone else to play with afterwards. Um, but with the creator-owned stuff, with working with Boom or Image or whoever the publisher might be, there's definitely a lot more freedom to do whatever you want, because these are creators that you've or characters that you've created with the artist. And so the two of you are in control. You can break them as hard as you want, or you can keep them safe, whatever you want to do. But there's definitely a lot more freedom, and a lot more latitude when you're running creator-owned books.
Right on. Now, when you're writing, I guess like the licensed, the legacy characters, whatever you want to call them, do you feel a particular weight to like, oh, I'm writing Batman or I'm writing the X-Men, I can't screw this up, otherwise people are going to be vicious. Do you read your own reviews?
No,
Is it
I
just
don't.
another job?
Uh, it's just I don't read the reviews because both good and bad reviews will influence me in different ways that I don't want to be influenced while I'm writing. I don't want to, with the bad, if there's a bad review, I don't want to start second guessing myself. If I've committed to a story and I know where I'm going, I want to make sure that I can just stick with that. And if it's a good review, I don't want to get like cocky or confident or complacent. I always kind of want to feel like I've got something to prove, and I'm hustling. And sometimes, like, sometimes reviews are just like, early days I did read reviews, and I had one series that I was doing where it just got sort of like hammered on the first issue. But then the second issue came out and people figured out what was going on, and then all the people who crapped on it with the first issue were back on board with the second issue. And all I got from that, other than the sense of like, I was right, I guess, but the only thing I gained was a lot of sleepless nights stressing about this thing. And so I try not to let outside reviews kind of influence my process while I'm writing. It's just I'll get too in my head about it, or like I said, too complacent. And so I just try and push all that noise away and I just do the work.
Mm-hmm. Now, are there any characters that you want to write for that you haven't gotten the opportunity to do yet, or do you have any particular stories in mind that you're like, maybe you don't get a mandate for it, but you approach the company, you're like, hey, I want to do this with Ghost Rider
now? Yeah, the big one that I want to write, and I think I'm the only person who ever call this character the big one, but like, I really want to write a Speedball story one day. I love Speedball as a character. He was I was around when they launched him as a character. I had a lot of strong feelings towards that character. And I have sort of this pitch that's been sitting around, poor Speedball, that I'd love to do one day. Beyond that, there's like the big ones, like, I've written a bit of Batman. It would be nice to write like a bit longer Batman or Daredevil or Spider-Man. Those are kind of like the three big ones for me. If but three big ones for everyone, I think. But beyond that, I just
Can you
usually,
or do you have to wait?
well, usually they have folks already tied to writing those characters. So, I could approach the editors and see about writing them, but they already have plans, right? There's things in progress. So usually it's a thing where they would approach you if they're interested in having you writing the character. But beyond that, like, I tend to prefer working on characters that are not like, I know I just gave a bunch of A-list characters, but I like working on like sort of lower like C-list characters, just because I find there's a bit more freedom. There's more interesting stuff that you can do with those characters, because there isn't the expectation that you can't go in and change those characters in some way, where you can't, like Spider-Man or Batman, you can't make a fundamental change that's going to last for the rest of that character's life in comics. But sometimes with the smaller characters you can make those changes, and sometimes you can, and then the next writer, our creative team comes along and just ignores it anyway. But at least you have that ability within your series to kind of push a little bit more with those characters.
Super cool. All right, well, to bring it all back to Displaced, what do you hope the residents of Oshawa and Durham get out of reading the series?
Man, I just hope they enjoy it. I hope I hope there's a bit of pleasure from seeing, their city represented, even if, I kind of take Oshawa off the map almost immediately in the book. I was down
I
in
haven't seen
Oshawa
Pickering yet.
for That's true. I don't think we touched on Pickering. But which I should have. Pickering was actually where I kind of, really started my comic collecting obsession when I was younger, because the Pickering used to have an amazing flea market back in the 80s that had a really good comics booth that I would go to, once a month or whatever. But yeah, get back, like, the people in Oshawa have been really great about this. I was in Oshawa in February for the launch of the book, did a signing over at Worlds Collide.
I got a Worlds
And
Collide cover.
yeah, it's a great cover by Richard Pace there. But we were there for about 4 hours, and it was busy, the entire time. People from Oshawa were pretty excited. And I ran into, people I hadn't seen in 20 plus years at that signing, people I went to elementary school with, and others. So, I'm just grateful to the people of the Durham region for really sort of supporting the book and showing up and really singing its praises online.
All right, well, we're gonna keep pushing. We're gonna get that issue 6 soon enough. But I know you have to run, so thank you for your time. This has been a wonderful interview. I hope you had a good time, and yeah, hopefully we get to do this again.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, man, and have a good one. I'll talk to you later on.